Antoninus Pius, officially Titus Aurelius Fulvus Boianus Arius Antoninus, a revered Roman emperor, ruling from AD 138 until 161. He ascended the throne following the death of his adoptive father you may have heard of, Hadrian, for whom he was one of the 4 consuls. And thus Antoninus's reign is characterized by remarkable tranquility and even affluence, partly due to his effective administration and a lack of military conflicts. Quite unique. In fact, he emphasized internal improvements and the consolidation of the empire, rather than territorial expansion. His government was marked by substantial legislative reforms and generous financial policies that strengthened local communities across the empire, enhancing public infrastructure such as roads, aqueducts, and promoting the arts. His tenure saw the Roman Empire reinforcing its foundations, entering a period of stability, later regarded as the apex of Roman peace. Thus he is celebrated for his personal virtues and moderate rule, receiving posthumous recognition as a model emperor. His adoptive sons Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus succeeded him, upholding the policies despite facing more challenging conditions. Hello and welcome. Now today we're going to talk about a bit of a different kind of ruler. Not one out there trying to conquer the world, but one just doing the best to make the most of what he's got. And that's pretty unique. So, tell me what you think in the comments once you've finished up, and what you've learned all about it. And we can begin. So, Titus Aurelius Boianus Antoninus, later known of course as Antoninus Pius. He was born near Lanuvium. Of course, it's not called that anymore. Nowadays it's the modern-day city of Lanuvio in Italy. Now, he was the son of Titus Aurelius Fulvus, who had served as a consul in 89, and his mother's name was Aria Fadila. Now, in terms of his family, the Aureli family, they originated from Nemausus, which is modern-day Nimes in Gallia Narbonensis. In terms of his grandfather, well, he was also named Titus Aurelius Fulvus, and he gained prominence in the Legio III Gallica as a legate himself, supporting Emperor Vespasian's rise to power. Now, although relatively new to the Roman Senate, the Aureli family, the Aureli Fulvi rather, were elevated under the Flavian dynasty and retained very strong ties to their provincial origins. Now, after his father's early death following his consulship, Antoninus was brought up by his maternal grandfather, that being Gnaeus Arius Antoninus. Gnaeus was well respected for his moral integrity, along with his intellectual prowess and close friendship with the great Pliny the Younger. Now, in terms of his mother, following her first husband's death, Aria Fadila remarried one Publius Julius Lupus, a suffect consul, in the year 98 AD. Now, this marriage produced 2 daughters, Aria Lupula and Julia Fadila. Around 110 to 115, Antoninus wed Annia Galeria Faustina the Elder, whose parents were consuls Marcus Annius Verus and Rupilia Faustina, making her a relative of Empress Vibia Sabina. Now, despite some rumors, pretty damaging ones about Faustina's character, Antoninus was deeply devoted to her, and their marriage was actually known to be a very happy one. Open displays of affection, all the rest. In fact, together they had 4 children, that being Marcus Aurelius Fulvus Antoninus, who actually died before 138, with his funerary inscription found in the mausoleum of Hadrian at Rome. The other, Marcus Galerius Aurelius Antoninus, who also died before 138, and his name appears on a Greek imperial coin, with funerary inscriptions also located at that same mausoleum. Now, unfortunately, another child passed away in 135, being Aurelia Fadila. It was a daughter. She was married to Lucius Plautius Lamia Silvanus, a consul in 145, and unfortunately they did not have any children. Well, finally, there was Annia Galeria Faustina Minor, who was commonly known as Faustina the Younger. Born around 125 to 130, and she became a future empress, the only child of theirs that actually managed to live to a notable age. In fact, she married her maternal cousin, Marcus Aurelius. Yes, that's the one you're thinking of, in 146. So, Antoninus's family connections and his marriage into another prominent senatorial family further cemented his status within Roman society. You see, it was all a political game. It was about not what you knew, but who you knew. If you were the cousin or an uncle or some distant relative of someone, you could worm your way into quite a lot of different government positions. And then, once you've got your foot in the door, you just have to wriggle your way up the rest of the way. Who knows where you could end up? Perhaps in the top position. Now, when Faustina passed away in 141, Antoninus was deeply grieved, as anybody would be. Now, to honor her memory, he sought approval from the Senate to deify her, and thus a temple dedicated to her was erected in the Roman Forum, where it would have its own priestess staff officiating. There were even coins that were made with her image, inscribed with Diva Faustina. Now, diva, of course, is referring to goddess. We get that word divinity, this sort of thing. Now, additionally, Antoninus created the Puelli Faustinianae, a charitable foundation that provided financial assistance to underprivileged girls from respectable families. As part of the Cura Annonae initiative, he also instituted a new alimenta, a kind of Roman welfare program. You can see how this is an emperor who has different priorities. Certainly something that is new for the time. I mean, it's the first I've heard of it. Of course, Antoninus being deeply aggrieved, he also chose not to remarry after the death of Faustina. But he did live with one Galeria Lysistrate, a freed woman who had actually been quite close to Faustina. You see, in ancient Rome it was common for prominent men, particularly widowers like later on Marcus Aurelius, but also Vespasian, to choose concubines rather than to remarry. Once again, politics. So Antoninus and Galeria's relationship did not produce any legitimate heirs, thus ensuring the line of succession remained more or less unchallenged. By remaining unmarried and avoiding another noble woman from a different family, Antoninus further secured his heirs' positions. Similarly, Marcus Aurelius later avoided remarrying to protect his children from a stepmother, instead choosing a concubine over his former fiancée, Caesonia Fabia. Now, before becoming emperor, Antoninus had several important positions, and among them was quaestor, consul in 120 alongside Lucius Catilius Severus, and even praetor. Emperor Hadrian, well, he eventually appointed him as one of the 4 proconsuls who he had in charge of governing Italia, particularly the region of Etruria, where Antoninus had actually owned quite a substantial amount of land. Now, his reputation was further elevated during his time as proconsul of Asia, likely between 134 and 135, where his governance was universally well regarded. In fact, he garnered favor with Emperor Hadrian, who adopted him as heir on the 25th of February 138, following the death of Hadrian's first adopted son, Lucius Aurelius. See, Hadrian's condition, however, for Antoninus' adoption was that Antoninus would, in turn, adopt Marcus Annius Verus, his wife's nephew, and also Lucius, the son of one Lucius Aurelius. These 2 boys would eventually ascend to the throne as emperors Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. Antoninus briefly took the name Imperator Titus Aelius Caesar Antoninus in anticipation of his reign, despite opposition from the other potential claimants, including his former consular colleague, Lucius Catilius Severus, who was certainly not impressed that somebody was stepping into the job instead of him. Well, nevertheless, Antoninus ascended to the throne without any opposition. It helps to be popular from the beginning. Thus, upon becoming emperor, Antoninus assumed the full title of Imperator Caesar Titus Aelius Hadrianus Antoninus Augustus Pontifex Maximus. Now try saying that 10 times fast. One of his first acts was to secure the Senate's approval to deify Hadrian. But this request was rejected, at least initially. The effort to honor Hadrian likely earned him the title Pius, which signified his devotion, affection to, and pietas. Other explanations for this title include his care for his elderly father-in-law during Senate meetings and his intervention to save those whom Hadrian had condemned to death during his final illness. And speaking of which, upon Hadrian's death, Antoninus approached Marcus Aurelius with a request to change his marriage plans. You see, Marcus was engaged to Caesonia Fabia, but Antoninus asked him to call the whole thing off, and instead of marrying her, just marry his daughter Faustina instead. Of course, in return, Faustina's engagement to Caesonia's brother, Lucius Commodus, who was expected to become Marcus's co-emperor, would also be dissolved. Well, after a little bit of thinking and planning on how to word it to his jilted fiancée, Marcus finally agreed to Antoninus's proposal. And so, as emperor, Antoninus supported the construction of temples, theatres, mausoleums. He promoted the arts and the sciences and offered rewards, even financial incentives, to teachers of rhetoric and philosophy, starting a golden age. Immediately, too, upon taking the throne, Antoninus made a few small changes, choosing to maintain many of the policies that were established by Hadrian. Now, epigraphical and prosopographical research has revealed that Antoninus's administration was primarily composed of interconnected families within the Senate, and many of these were associated with the cult of Hadrian. Now, there is one legend that tells the story of Paraskevi of Rome, a Christian legend, by the way, who was captured by soldiers of Emperor Antoninus Pius in the village of Therapia, Constantinople, and put on trial for blasphemy. Constantinople, of course, being the modern-day Istanbul. Now, she was accused of causing the empire's recent misfortunes through her somewhat blasphemous statements. Antoninus tried to convince Paraskevi to renounce her faith, and even offered to marry her, but she was not interested in that. Well, as a result, she was tortured, having a steel helmet with nails placed on her head and tightened. Despite the torture, she felt no pain, and her endurance inspired many to convert to Christianity after witnessing quite a test of faith. Well, naturally, frustrated Antoninus ordered that Paraskevi be immersed in a boiling cauldron of oil and tar, but she emerged unharmed. Well, after this, the accusations of sorcery, of course, went. Paraskevi splashed the liquid into Antoninus's face, blinding him. Desperate for help, he asked her for assistance, and she restored his sight. This miracle led to Antoninus Pius to convert to Christianity and release Paraskevi, after which he ended his persecution of Christians. That is, if you believe such a story. It's pretty fanciful, but, well, it's worth telling. Of course, there are no records that exist of any military-related actions in which Antoninus participated throughout his tenure. In fact, during his reign, which is considered to be the most peaceful in the history of the Principate, there were only a few military disturbances throughout the empire. Nothing big, though. Well, for example, in Mauritania, the unrest had led to the appointment of a senator as the governor of Mauritania Tingitana, a break from the usual practice of selecting an equestrian procurator, and cavalry units from Pannonia were sent to the region, resulting in the fortification of cities like Sala and Tipasa. And this was the biggest problem they had in the whole time. There were a few lesser disturbances in Judea and among the Brigantes in Britannia, though these were considered less significant than prior or later revolts, and they kind of fizzled out without anything really happening. Maybe a few punch-ups, but no bloodbaths, we put it that way. Now, in Britain, while we're on it, Antoninus adopted a more proactive approach by appointing Quintus Lollius Urbicus, who was actually a Numidian, a former governor of Germania Inferior. They made him governor of that area in 139 AD. Now, at the command of Antoninus, Lollius led an invasion of southern Scotland, securing victories and overseeing the construction of the Antonine Wall, which stretched from the Firth of Forth to the Firth of Clyde. The wall was gradually abandoned, however, by the mid-150s, and it was completely decommissioned by the early 160s. Though we're not exactly sure why, but it seems that they didn't have much of an interest in doing anything on the border. Now, Antoninus's biography in Historia Augusta briefly references the campaign, while Pausanias also makes a vague allusion to a small conflict in Britain. An inscription by Legio to Augusta, which participated in the wall's construction, features a relief of several prisoners, including one that was actually missing his head, and that's unusual for a person to be missing that, and it does suggest that combat did occur during the campaign. Now, despite being shorter and more easily defensible than Hadrian's wall, Antonine's wall encompassed a desolate territory, and it was hard to grow things up there too. Scotland does not get much sun on the crops, I'm afraid. The lack of urban development behind the wall and the stress on supply lines made maintaining control of the additional land a lot more costly. The game was not worth the candle, I'm afraid. And so, without the Romanization of the region, the territory behind the wall remained quite difficult to control. It is believed that the decision to invade these parts of southern Scotland and build the Antonine Wall might have actually been driven by internal political considerations rather than anything pressing. The campaign provided Antoninus with the opportunity to have at least a little bit of military prestige early in his reign. Thus, in 142, he celebrated an imperial salute and formally assumed the title of imperator for the second and final time, with the minting of coins commemorating his victory in Britain. Although Antoninus delegated military leadership in the British campaign and took a hands-off approach, the orator Fronto later credited him as the helmsman of the expedition, ensuring that the honor remained with the emperor, and rather the commanders who he had passed the gruesome bits of the task on to. But it seems pretty obvious to me that Antoninus was simply not interested in going out and taking glory by force. Well, the pursuit of military accomplishment was necessitated, however, by the reality of Antoninus's reign, which, despite its general tranquil nature, is just like any other reign of any other emperor, that being not devoid of attempts of usurpation. Now, we have it from Historia Augusta, which references two individuals, that is, Cornelius Priscianus for disturbing the peace of Spain. Priscianus was also a successor to Lollius Urbicus as governor of Britain, and Attilius Rufius Titianus, perhaps a troublemaker previously exiled under Hadrian who had came back to cause some trouble later on. In fact, seeing that the new emperor was quite a bit more, not harmless, but just not too willing to go out and fight, maybe he thought that it was his time to strike. Well, either way, both endeavors are corroborated by the Fasti Ostienses and the removal of Priscianus's name from an inscription. In both instances, Antoninus did not formally oversee the subsequent repression. Now, see, Priscianus, he took his own life, so that's that problem sorted. And Titianus, well, he was convicted by the Senate, although Antoninus refrained from confiscating the assets of his family, which is usually what people do. Everyone goes down with the ship when you try to depose the emperor. Well, on to Dacia Inferior, which had its own problems. Certainly a chaotic region. They experienced difficulties that necessitated the conferment of enhanced authority on the procurator governor and the deployment of supplementary troops to the province. Now, the Greek city of Olbia, located on the northern Black Sea coast, was defended against the Scythians, nomads, robbing and stealing. It's much easier than setting up roots and growing your own things. Of course, during his reign, the governor of Upper Germany, likely Gaius Popilius Carus Pido, a very unfortunate last name once again, constructed new fortifications in the Agri Decumates, extending the Limes Germanicus 15 kilometers into his province and adjacent Rhaetia province. A little bit to the east, Roman suzerainty over Armenia was maintained by the selection of Arsacid descendant Sohaemus as a client monarch in AD 140. Now, Antoninus was notably exceptional among emperors, as he managed these crises without even departing Italy throughout his entire reign, sending letters, just telling people what to do. A real delegator. He addressed these provincial issues of war and peace via their governors, or at least through imperial correspondence to cities like Ephesus, some of which were actually publicly exhibited. This form of governance received much acclaim from his peers and subsequent generations. Of course, Antoninus was the final Roman emperor acknowledged by the kingdoms in India. That's right, all the way in India, particularly the Empire of Kushan. You see, the Indians, Bactrians, Hyrcanians, they had all sent ambassadors to Antoninus at some point. They were aware of his embodiment of justice, accentuated by his dignified and striking appearance, as well as his slender and robust physique. That's what they said about him, and that's not a bad review at all. The advent of the Antonine Plague and conflicts with northern Germanic tribes unfortunately compelled Marcus Aurelius to shift the focus of foreign policies, increasingly neglecting issues pertaining to the Far East in favor of subjects directly related to the empire's survival. And thus the breadth of the spread of the Roman Empire kind of contracted somewhat because of this. Sorting out the problems at home before anything else, one can hardly blame them. Now back to Antoninus. He was esteemed as an adept administrator, and of course a proficient builder, as we have listed off some of his achievements already in that regard. Now, despite a comprehensive construction initiative that enhanced the accessibility of potable water for the citizens of Rome through the establishment of aqueducts, bridges, and even roads across the empire, the emperor successfully bequeathed a substantial public treasury amounting to approximately 2.7 billion sesterces. Yes, that's quite a lot of money. Now, Rome would not have another emperor bequeathing a surplus to his successor for a long time after this. But nonetheless, this fund was rapidly diminished during Antoninus's reign due to the Antonine Plague, which is not something you want named after you. Well, this plague was effectively introduced by those soldiers who returned home from the Parthian conquest. I'm afraid we're a few thousand years too early for germ theory. And here's another thing. He notably halted tax collection. That's right, completely stopped it in various places that were impacted by natural disasters. And that includes fires in Rome and Narbonne, and earthquakes in Rhodes and certain provinces within Asia. He provided substantial financial grants for the reconstruction and recovery of several Greek cities following two significant earthquakes, first around 140 rather, primarily impacting Rhodes and other islands, and the second in 152, around Cyzicus, Ephesus, and Smyrna. His financial assistance garnered acclaim from Greek authors, including Aelius Aristides and Pausanias. These cities were bestowed the customary honorific distinctions by Antoninus, including his directive that all governors of Asia must enter the province through Ephesus upon assuming office. You see, Ephesus in particular received favor from Antoninus, who affirmed its distinction of possessing 2 temples for the imperial cult, thereby securing its preeminence in the hierarchy of imperial honorific titles, surpassing both Pergamon and Smyrna. Now, his interaction with Greek-speaking cities, Antoninus adhered to Hadrian's policy of cultivating relationships with the local elites, particularly intellectuals, philosophers, literary educators, and physicians, who were explicitly exempted from any obligations requiring personal financial contributions for civic purposes. Not a bad deal, isn't it? But of course, credit where it's due. It seems that Hadrian had established this privilege sometime earlier, but Antoninus had just reaffirmed it through an edict. Either way, Antoninus was recognized as a keen observer of religious rites and formal celebrations, but not just Roman, foreign as well. In fact, he's recognized for having progressively formalized the official worship of the Great Mother, from which his reign onward incorporated a bull sacrifice, previously a private ceremony, now conducted for the emperor's benefit as well. He endeavored to present himself as magistrate of the res publica, regardless of the breadth and ambiguity of his authority. He is attributed with the division of the imperial treasury, the fiscus. That's where we get that word fiscal from. The division pertained to the partitioning of the imperial assets into 2 segments. Initially, the fiscus refers to the properties of the crown, which are hereditary assets passed down to each successive monarch, irrespective of their prior affiliation with the imperial dynasty. Now, secondly, the res privata refers to the private properties associated with the personal upkeep of the emperor and his family, akin to the privy purse, kind of like that. Now, an anecdote in the Historia Augusta biography depicts Antoninus responding to Faustina's complaint about his frugality by stating, "We've gained an empire and lost even what we had before," which may reflect Antoninus's genuine apprehensions regarding the establishment of the res privata. Either way, private to his public service, Antoninus significantly augmented his personal wealth through numerous inheritances, a result of his meticulous attention to his relatives. Furthermore, he bequeathed a reputation for parsimony, and was likely resolute in preventing his personal assets from being consumed by the exigencies of the imperial throne. Of course, the emperor was aided by 5 principal legal advisors. He didn't go at it all on his own, that being Lucius Fulvius Abunius Valens, a legal treatise author, and Lucius Ulpius Marcellus, a prolific writer, and 3 other individuals who were not as notable. Now, among these 3, Lucius Volusius Maesianus was the most notable, having transitioned from a military officer to a civil procurator under Antoninus, and would eventually emerge as the emperor's foremost legal advisor. Marcianus would ultimately be selected to hold several prefectures and then to oversee the legal studies of Marcus Aurelius. He was also the author of an extensive treatise on the testamentary trusts. Antoninus's reign marked a significant relationship between jurists and the imperial authority, evidenced by the emergence of the Institutes of Gaius, a foundational legal textbook for novices. Gotta start somewhere. Well, a notable event during his rule took place in 148, when the 900th anniversary of Rome's founding was commemorated with grand festivities in the city. The event spanned several days, resulting in the demise of numerous exotic creatures, unfortunately, including elephants, giraffes, tigers, hippopotamuses, crocodiles, whoever was brave enough to get near them too. Well, although this augmented Antoninus's popularity, the parsimonious emperor was compelled to debase the Roman money. He reduced the silver purity of the denarius from 89% to 83.5%, resulting in a decrease in actual silver weight from 2.88 grams to 2.68 grams. Doesn't sound like much, but it's a big deal when you look at the actual value of money. Now, we can't go on too much about that. But what we will briefly mention is something a little bit more exciting, more regarding the communications with China, who were at that time in the Han dynasty. Now, the initial party asserting to be an ambassador mission from Rome to China was documented in 166 AD by one Ho Han Shu. Now, it's been suggested that the delegation was probably comprised of merchants, given that several Roman traders had journeyed to India, with some potentially venturing further east. And there are, unfortunately, no documented instances of official Roman ambassadors reaching such distances. Well, additionally, there is a fragment of Republican-era Roman glassware that has been discovered at a Western Han tomb in Guangzhou, which is definitely a long way from home, situated near the South China Sea, dating to the early 1st century BC. You see, Roman gold medallions, produced under the rule of Antoninus Pius and maybe Marcus Aurelius, have also been discovered in southern Vietnam, which was formerly part of the kingdom of Hunan adjacent to the Chinese province of that time being called Jiaozhi. Now, this location may have been a port city, perhaps the port city of Kattigara, as recorded by Ptolemy around 150, who noted that it was visited by a Greek sailor named Alexander, and situated beyond the Golden Chersonese, i.e., the old word for the Malay Peninsula. That's what they used to call it. Now, there are a few Roman coins from the reigns of Tiberius to Aurelian that have also been found in Xi'an, China, which was the location of the Han capital Chang'an, and also the location of the terracotta warriors that I'm sure you're no doubt familiar with. However, the considerably larger quantities of Roman coins discovered in India indicates that the Roman maritime trade for acquiring Chinese silk was primarily focused there. It was just, well, easier to get to, rather than going all the way to China or all along the overland Silk Road, traversing ancient Persia. Of course, usually you would meet somewhere in the middle and pass over the goods through middlemen. There really wasn't any need to go all the way to China. So, in AD 140, Marcus Aurelius was appointed consul alongside Antoninus, acquiring the designation of Caesar, signifying heir presumptive. Now, as Antoninus became older and began having some health problems, Marcus assumed greater administrative responsibilities. Following the demise of Marcus Gavius Maximus, one of Antoninus' most valued counselors, in either 156 or 57, Marcus's administrative responsibilities began to escalate even further. You see, for 2 decades, Gavius Maximus served as Praetorian prefect, a position that encompassed both administrative and military responsibilities. Gavius Maximus was conferred with the consular insignia and the honors appropriate for a senator. He was renowned as an exceedingly strict disciplinarian, and several equestrian procurators harbored enduring resentments towards him. In fact, one procurator, called Gaius Censorius Niger, passed away during the lifetime of Gavius Maximus. Censorius Niger's will was not kind to Maximus. In fact, it outright disparaged him, causing significant embarrassment to one of the heirs, the orator Fronto. Remember him? He's back. Of course, the demise of Gavius Maximus prompted a transition in the governing body. It is speculated that legal advisor Lucius Maesianus took the post of grey eminence. You see, Maesianus served briefly as the prefect of Egypt, and later as Praefectus Annone in Rome. If Maesianus ascended to prominence, it might have been specifically to facilitate the forthcoming and unprecedented joint succession of the 2 young emperors. Either way, in 160, Marcus and Lucius were appointed as joint consuls for the subsequent year. Antoninus at this time, who may have been unwell, passed away before the year's conclusion, likely on the 7th of March. 2 days prior to his demise, it's indicated that Antoninus was at his familial estate in Lanuvium, Etruria, which was some 12-13 miles away from Rome. He consumed Alpine cheese at dinner with apparently considerable voracity, and, well, this caused him to vomit in the night time and develop a fever the following day. They told him to go easy on the cheese. Well, the following day, he convened the imperial council and entrusted the state and his daughter to Marcus Aurelius. The emperor encapsulated his life in his final words. When the Night Watch Tribune inquired about the password, he replied, "Equanimity." Subsequently, he rolled over, as if preparing to sleep, but he never woke up. His demise concluded the longest rule since Augustus. In fact, he just succeeded Tiberius by a few months. His record for the second longest rule actually remained unchallenged for 168 years until 329, when he was eclipsed by Constantine the Great. And just like that, that was the life of Antoninus Pius. Bit of a different sort of emperor, wasn't he? Exciting, I think. That progenitor of Marcus Aurelius, the guy in my profile picture. It's too late to change it now, I'm afraid. Well, it is customary before I go to thank the top-tier supporters and the Patreons who certainly help to keep the channel going, so I will do that. It's Dark, Carrie, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Erin, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Start Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Christine, Fizarbo, Legitmus, and Maverick. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next exciting video. Lots of love to you all. Good night.